All right, this is the second part of our lecture on spine. We're going to move over from the cervical spine to the lumbar spine. Start off with lumbar disc herniation. So this is a common condition, affects about 2% of the population. So what you have a sort of sagittal type or lateral image here, and you have a kind of an axial projection here. What you see here is the annulus fibrosus, right? And when you have a defect or disruption in the annulus fibrosus, the nucleus pulposus can exit, and here you can see that it can herniate and cause irritation, compression of the nerve root there, and this can cause radiculopathy or lumbar radiculopathy or sciatica. You can see this occurring from another view. Most commonly at, so this is S1, L5, L4, so commonly at the L4-5 level as shown here, as well as L5-S1. A lot of times these will improve on their own within 6 weeks to 3 months, but not always. Under assessment, by history, you may elicit a story that there was an abrupt onset of symptoms. Not always, but certainly the patient with the isolated lumbar disc herniation may give you a history that they were doing something and then suddenly they got this abrupt onset of symptoms. And it can be lower back pain that then is followed by unilateral radicular leg pain, lower extremity pain. Shown here in the diagram, this can be worsened by sitting, sometimes by standing, coughing, and sneezing, and usually lying down and rest provides relief. Radicular leg pain or pain kind of shooting down the lower leg is what you look for. It's often difficult for them to find a comfortable position. That pain is exaggerated, particularly with sitting. As mentioned, this increases the intradiscal pressure. So on your physical exam, you want to perform a thorough neuro exam, motor and sensory exam of the lower extremities, reflexes, coordination, and then some special testing you can do, such as shown here, straight leg test, crossover test, femoral stretch. Just another reminder of the anatomy. Now, we're going to number these for you. S1, these are the vertebrae. L5, L4, L3, L2, L1, okay? So we talked about there were 8 cervical nerve roots, 7 cervical vertebrae, right? And in the cervical spine, the C7 nerve root exits above C7, right, or below C6. In the lumbar spine, but there are only 7 vertebrae. So then what happens when you get to the thoracic spine? It switches, and then in the lumbar spine it continues this way where the L2 nerve root exits below the L2 body, right? And there's 5 lumbar nerve roots, 5 lumbar vertebrae. So the L5 nerve root down here exits below L5 above S1, okay? And this is the rest of some of the relevant anatomy. You have the discs, the anterior longitudinal ligament, the vertebral bodies, then you have the spinous processes posteriorly, and then the posterior ligaments. Okay, and then some of the other bony anatomy is shown here as well, the pedicles, the transverse process, the lamina. It's important as well. We'll show those in some other images. So the L5 nerve roots very commonly affected, and these are some of the exam findings you will see with the L4, L5, or S1 nerve root involvement. So remember your dermatomes, remember your myotomes, and then reflexes. Now we don't have reflex for everything that localizes very well. So for S1, Achilles reflex. For L4, patellar tendon, but really don't have a good one for L5. Just this diagram, you can pause to look at it just to kind of recognize what are we talking about by extraforaminal or lateral recess, and you don't have to spend too much time on this, but it might help to explain some language you're going to hear when talking about these the location of these disc herniations. So lower extremity dermatomes is a continuation of the picture you saw in the last video, first part of this lecture. These are the lower extremity dermatomes. All right, and these are all sort of have their origin if you go back to your embryology as to how and where they are located. The myotomes in the lower extremity, L2, you test the hip flexors. L3, you test your quads. L4, you can test the tib ant. L5 is your great toe or extensor hallucis longus, for instance, extensor digitorum brevis. And for S1, gastroc soleus, right, or plantar flexion strength. Now, it's, you can try to commit these to memory. There are some mnemonics and songs and things out there that you can find on the internet to help you sort of remember what does what. And it's important, certainly clinically, if you're trying to correlate it. I mean, I can tell you, at least in orthopedics, we do this every single day on most patients we see, certainly in the hospital and many in the office as well, where we're trying to correlate those findings. So types of disc herniations, you're going to hear these terms a lot. Now here, what you're looking at are axial slices, right? So here's your disc, annulus, fibrosis, nucleus pulposus, disc herniation. So this is a central disc herniation, and here's your cord, okay, and here's the exiting nerve roots, right? So here, what you see in orange, right, these guys here, I'm going to erase all that, are the nerve roots being affected, right? So that's your central disc herniation, okay, and that affects the cauda or cauda equina. The cauda equina are the lumbar and lumbosacral nerve roots that are continuing distally. So with the central disc herniation, you don't get the exiting nerve roots. You get everything that's going straight down, right? This makes sense anatomically. Foraminal disc herniation goes into the foramen, and you get the exiting nerve root as shown here. So if this is the L4, L5 level, you're going to get the L4 nerve root, right? Posterolateral, here you're going to get the traversing or descending nerve root, so like the next nerve root down, right? So if this is the L4-5 level, you're not going to get the L4 nerve root, you might get the L5 nerve root, okay? And then far lateral disc herniation is going to get the exiting nerve root also, similar to foraminal disc herniation. So far lateral disc prolapse or herniation at L4, L5 will result in, so far lateral, exiting nerve root, compression of the L4 nerve root. Remember, the L4 nerve root is what exits between L4 and L5. So, going back to our evaluation, diagnostic testing. So after 6 weeks of symptoms, you may have to get imaging, lumbar, spine x-rays, usually not that specific for patients who just have disc herniation. An MRI can help show this. If you have a situation where patients had surgery, sometimes you need to get an MRI with contrast to distinguish between a recurrent herniation versus scar tissue, and otherwise a non-contrast MRI is fine. Now in certain patients who cannot get MRIs, for instance, for whatever reason, they have metal in a sensitive area, a pacemaker, etc., CT myelogram may be a good choice for you. Treatment: NSAIDs, reduced activity, maybe even bed rest. For very severe pain, sometimes opioid pain medications have been used. Oral corticosteroids have been used, such as a prednisone taper. And then for more longer-term treatment, physical therapy, sometimes epidural steroid injections. And when these fail, sometimes microdiscectomy, which is surgery, can be done to alleviate symptoms of compression of the nerve root. And this can then hopefully improve within 6 weeks to 3 months. So there is a differential to consider. We'll talk about cauda equina syndrome in the next lecture in Spine 2 and Spine Emergencies. So certainly this is in your differential. Hip arthritis, it's in the neighborhood, so that can cause similar symptoms. Lumbar spinal stenosis without necessarily significant disc herniation. Trochanteric bursitis of the proximal femur, and vascular insufficiency. Adverse outcomes: certainly a bad disc herniation that's untreated, resulting in cauda equina syndrome, can result in permanent deficits, and you can certainly get a specific nerve root deficit if you have a very severe or long-standing disc herniation affecting a nerve root. Case example, a patient, a 46-year-old female, left leg pain for 8 weeks. And it's important, I didn't really emphasize this too much before, but people don't think about this. You don't see these patients a lot, but if a patient just has back pain, probably don't have radiculopathy, they probably don't have, or they may, but they probably don't have, and they probably don't have something that's necessarily going to require any kind of immediate treatment. Leg pain is a bit of a problem because now you're thinking more that this is a radiculopathy, is probably nerve root irritation, because most mechanical back pain doesn't have any particular neurologic findings. And as you know, most, and you'll go from your reading, most low back and mechanical back pain can be treated conservatively. This patient gives a history where they were trying to do something and they got relatively, they kind of remember when this pain started. A little bit of motor deficit on exam, positive straight leg raise test, causing sciatic nerve tension, for instance, and tension on your, causing irritation of the nerve roots. And here you can see on your sagittal imaging a disc herniation. A lot of these are a little easier to see on axial imaging, but certainly most people, if you're not used to looking at MRIs, can certainly look at a sagittal image like this and recognize that there's an abnormality right there. And here on the axial, that's where you can have that disc herniation at L5S1 in this case. So switching gears, lumbar spinal stenosis. So again, stenosis meaning narrowing of the space for the nerve root. So here you can see on the normal side, lots of space. Here you can see bone spurs, osteophytes, possibly a little bit of degenerative spondylolisthesis, tight space for the nerve roots causing stenosis, or a narrowing of the spinal canal causing nerve root compression. So this is something we see mostly in older patients. It can be at one level or multiple levels. Like we talked before, you can also get this in the cervical spine. And radiographically, this is a very common phenomenon. And that can happen from lumbar degeneration. You can have congenital stenosis. This is something we're not going to talk about too much, but can predispose somebody to having a little bit more likelihood of nerve root injury. And some syndromic conditions can cause this as well. So stenosis could be quite advanced before symptoms occur. This is not something that usually suddenly causes pain, but it kind of creeps up on you. Neurogenic claudication that causes radicular symptoms in one and both legs is something you may see. It is typically worse with lumbar extension. So from you're assessing this, you're having the patient stand up, you have them lean back, and if they lean back or lumbar extension, it causes that pain, especially a radicular pain. You would be concerned that that could be from stenosis. And then when they flex forward, their pain improves. Now, a shopping cart sign is essentially like a person flexing forward, that then when they walk, they feel better by kind of leaning forward, like when they're pushing their shopping cart, or almost doing it for pain relief when they're walking. I'm not going to go through all of these, but this is a very classic comparison clinically that is made, which is how to distinguish neurogenic from vascular claudication and lower extremity pain. And if you take many of these symptoms into account, you can potentially help distinguish one from the other. On physical exam, you very frequently have normal motor and sensory examinations. I mean, you might have some diminished reflexes, but you usually don't have significant motor strength weakness or numbness. You certainly have to, do a vascular examination in order to help distinguish from vascular claudication. X-rays can be helpful. Here you see an example of degenerative spondylolisthesis, or sort of, you can see again, normal kind of cascade, and then little step off here, so that's a spondylolisthesis. You may see degenerative changes. An MRI of the lumbar spine will help show this in a little bit more detail, as well as any associated areas of nerve root impingement, disc herniation, etc. Like before, a CT myelogram can be a good substitute. Differential. So some things you might not think of. AAA, abdominal aortic aneurysm, right? And in this case, maybe a palpable pulsatile mass may help distinguish it. Arterial insufficiency. We talked about there are some ways to distinguish that. Diabetes can also cause numbness and sometimes neuropathic pain, as well as spinal infection can be a little bit difficult to diagnose sometimes and present like this. Treatment: NSAIDs, oral corticosteroids in some cases, physical therapy, especially flexion-based exercises, water therapy, epidural injections, and if necessary, surgical decompression. Sometimes if it's a spinal fusion, if you also have spondylolisthesis, to make sure you don't have instability after you decompress them. All right, so we're going to stop here and we'll finish up with spondylolisthesis and deformity in the last part of this lecture. Thanks.